The third area that my father just really helped me in, and a lesson that was invaluable to me, was the fact that my dad taught me to be consistent. My father was always the same. He had good days, he had bad days, circumstances that were up, circumstances were down, but he was steady. He was faithful. In fact, sometimes when I think of my father, if somebody just said you could only describe him in one word, I would probably debate between the word faithful and the word consistent. And yet I can really clump them together, and so can you. If faithful is consistent, and consistent is faithful. And he was consistent in not only his words but his deeds. He had great integrity in the fact that what he said is what he did, and what he did is what he said. So he never sent our family, he never sent us curveballs. We didn't look at him and say, what just happened there? Oh my, that doesn't seem like Dad. Now, let me just also say that my dad was human. So I'm not in any way wanting to make him a saint. In fact, I can promise you he taught me a lot of great lessons. But all the lessons he taught me weren't maybe the best lessons. So let me just give you one real quick. My father taught me how to drive fast, okay? My dad liked to speed. My brother likes to speed. My sister likes to speed. I like to speed. I'm sorry. We learned that from my dad. My dad, every other year, would buy a car. It was a ritual. Every 2 years, Dad would go down and buy a car. And we loved to go with him when he bought the car because two things. We knew it wouldn't take long. My dad made decisions very quickly. And secondly, we knew that as soon as he bought the car, we'd get in the back seat and he would take us out to Route 22, heading west out of Circleville, Ohio. And he'd turn around to the back seat, and he'd look at the kids and he'd say, "Kids, let's see what she's got." He'd put that accelerator to the floor and we'd take off on that little straight road. And he'd get it up to 100 miles an hour and he'd let off the gas and kind of pull over and turn around and smile at the kids and say, "I think we got a good one. Let's take it home." That was a ritual every other year. And my father, he had a heavy foot. So I'm telling you that because I just want you to know when I'm talking about all the incredible qualities that he had some humanness to him also. He wasn't a perfect man, never even pretended to be a perfect man. He was an authentic man, not a perfect man. But when I look at my father, most of the lessons I'm going to teach you are incredibly positive and uplifting. And I just want you to know that he had a human side too. He wasn't a saint, close. He wasn't a saint. But he taught us to be consistent. And his consistency was rooted in the fact that he had a set of values that he greatly valued. And he had a set of principles that he always followed. And those principles just kept him going straight. And those values, and some of the principles, by the way, some of the values I'll be teaching you in these 3 lessons on my tribute to my father. But those principles helped him to go straight, and those values helped him to stay solid. And so therefore, when I saw my dad, everything was congruent. Everything matched up. It's been a great lesson for me because I feel that consistency is something that is an incredible way to live, but I think so many times it's kind of overlooked. I mean, we seldom get a consistency award, and I suppose if we did, it's not a sexy word. I suppose if we did get a consistency award, we might be a little ticked and say, "Come on, can't you think of better words or adjectives for me like genius or brilliant or charismatic?" I mean, consistency is it's a great word. It's a solid word, but it's not the one we strive for. When you ask people, what do you want to be in life? Very few people are going to say, "I want to be consistent." And yet, as I watched my father live for 98 years and 8 months, let me tell you what I know about consistency. It compounds. Trust me. If you are consistently good, you consistently compound goodness. And it gets better and better and better. That's a fact. I had a conversation one day with my dad. He was probably about 90. And we were talking in his office at his home. And he said, John, he said, isn't it wonderful? The older you get, the more a person loves people. He said, it's just been wonderful. I'm getting older, but I love more people. I love people more today than I did 20 years ago. He said, isn't it wonderful that as you get older, you just love people more? And I said, Dad, that's not true. I know a whole bunch of people. I'll bet you do too. I know a lot of people. They're getting older and they're not loving people more. Hey, they're getting older, but they're not getting better. Now, it was true for my father because there's a principle here that I want to teach. It's about consistency. He loved people when he was young. He loved people in his middle age. He loved people when he retired. You see, my father, every step of the journey, loved people. Now, here's what I know. If you have a good quality within you, as you get older, that quality expands, it exaggerates, because one of the things that happens with aging is exaggeration. And so the qualities I have in me, if they're good, they grow and exaggerate in a positive way. And the qualities I have within me, if they're negative and bad, they also grow and exaggerate, but they grow and exaggerate in a negative way. In my book, Today Matters, which is sometimes entitled Make Today Count, I talk about the fact that that I have disciplines in my life, what I call the daily 12 disciplines. And I talk about in the book how that I think it was 3 or 4 of those disciplines I literally learned as a teenager and about 3 or 4 others in my 20s. And I talk about when I learned these and to practice these important disciplines in my life. But the one that I learned last, the one that I worked on and fixed and improved last was my own health. And I didn't even work on it until I was 51. I had a heart attack. I was always I thought, a healthy person. I wasn't a sickly person, that was for sure. And when I had a heart attack at 51, I had a big wake-up call, and all of a sudden I realized, John, you have to live a more healthy lifestyle. You're falling short here. So that was the last maybe good habit I formed, and I didn't form it until 51. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Of all the daily disciplines I have in my life, do you know what today is my most difficult discipline? Healthy lifestyle, eating right, exercising. Why? Because for 51 years, I didn't do it. Now, it's the point that I'm making on consistency, that the earlier we become consistent in good habits, the more those good habits compound in a positive way, just as if I'm consistent in bad habits, they compound in a negative way. And my father taught me the value of good habits and living this incredible, unbelievable, consistent life.
I'm going to give you 5 things that I do every day to add value to people, okay? And this is going to work. This is going to work for you. And by the way, this is you. Every one of you can do this. Every one of you can do this. So look at your neighbor and say, even you can do this. Go ahead. All right? Even you. Because there are 5 things I do every day. Every day. You just say, John, what do you mean by every day? I don't want to go too deep on you. Don't want to go over your head. I mean every day. Number 1, every day, I value people. And you say, okay, when you say you value people, I mean, who do you value? Everyone. And you say, what do you mean by everyone? Everyone. Jesus created everyone. What part of everyone do we not understand? Look at the person you're sitting beside and say, Jesus loves you. Go ahead and tell them that. Jesus loves you. Look back and say, Jesus loves me. Yeah, he does. Look back at him and say, Jesus loves people I don't even know. Yeah, that's good. Oh, one more thing. Look at him and say, Jesus loves people I don't like. And let me tell you something. He loves people you don't like. He really does. If you look at the life of Jesus in the Gospels, the one thing you come after reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is that man valued everybody. And the only people who didn't like it were religious people. We've got to make a decision. Are we going to start connecting with people, or are we going to keep correcting people? We okay? My name's John. I'm your friend. So every day I value people, one. Number two, every day I think of ways to add value to people. Every day I think of ways to add value to people. About a month ago, I was talking to Stephen on the phone about me coming out here, and he said you were going to be in this vision series, and he was telling that the message that wouldn't be preached by the time I got here would be, I want to make a difference. I said, well, could I preach that message for you? And he said, well, sure, if you want. So I want to. I want to. What am I doing? Before I ever got here, a month before, I'm thinking of a way to add value to you. Add value to him. I mean, I could have said, no, I got my little sugar sticks I'd rather preach. No, I've never preached this before. I developed this message just for you today. It's all yours. It's the covenant message. Nobody else gets it. They don't get it. Now, it's very simple. Why? Because I think of ways of adding value to people. Number three, every day I look for ways. I look for ways to add value to people. And let me say, you see what you anticipate. So when you anticipate of adding value to people, you start seeing ways to add value to people. Just as if most people, they don't get up in the morning and say, how can I add value to people? Most people get up in the morning and say, who's going to add value to me? We're all selfish. Are you with me? And if you don't think you're selfish, outside of the fact you don't think, if you don't think you're selfish, let me ask you a very simple question. The next time you're in a group picture, when you see that group picture, could I ask you a question? Who is the first person you look for in that picture? Now, come on now. Hey, and if you look bad, you say, oh, terrible picture, bad picture. Back here, come on, do it again. Come on, group, come on, do it one more time. Yeah, come on. And if you look good in the picture, you say, oh, great picture. Send that to you. Yeah. That's why in adding value to people, you have to be intentional. Because it's not natural. The selfish nature of us is, who's going to do something for me today? But the Jesus that created us and empowers us and saves us, he wants us to add value to people. Every day, I value people, think of ways to add value to people, look for ways to add value to people. Therefore, I do things. Every day, I do things that add value to people. Every day, I do things that add value to people. Every day. Margaret and I have 5 grandchildren. They call Margaret Mimi. They call me Papa. Margaret picked the names. For the first grandchild, she said, what are the grandkids going to call us? I said, I have no clue. It's not really been on the top of my agenda. Well, she said, I've been thinking about it. She said, I want them to call me Mimi. Well, I said, I like that. But she said, I don't want them to call you Pee-Pee. I said, I agree with that too. I don't want them to call me Pee-Pee. So they call me Papa. I love that name. Every year I ask God to give me a word for the year. And my word this year is Father. And I just want to be a father. I want to be they've got great fathers, but I want to be a spiritual. I want to be a Stephen. For you and Erica, I want to be a spiritual father to you. I want to oversee and love and care for and bless you. I want to be a father. I want to be a papa. And so James, who was 9 at the time, because I'm asking him all the time, okay, how are we going to add value to people? Because they know this. They know this lesson. Trust me, they know this lesson. And James, who was 9, said, I know what I'm going to do, Papa. He said, tomorrow when we go to school, I'm going to open doors for everybody. And I'm going to not only open doors, I'm going to smile and say, have a good day. Next evening, he called me. He said, Papa, I had a great day. Tell me about it, James. He said, I opened 47 doors today for people, and I smiled 47 times and said, have a good day. He's 9 years old, and he's already got it figured out. I know people. Come on now. He's already got it figured out. I know people, they're 79 and they haven't figured it out. Every day, value people, think of ways to add value to people, look for ways to add value to people, do things that add value to people. Number 5, every day I encourage others to add value to people. Oh yeah, that's what I'm doing with you right now. I'm encouraging you to add value to other people. Wow. I have privileged in one of my businesses to have a coaching company called the John Maxwell Team. Some of my coaches are here today. We started 6 years ago. We now have 20,000 coaches in 142 countries of the world. Fastest growing, top coaching company. And you know what? We teach them every time they come. They come every 6 months to Orlando, and we teach all of our new ones when they come in the John Maxwell Team DNA. And right at the top of that list is we value people. In fact, I tell my coaches, you are people of value that add value to others. That's who you are. You're people of value that add value to others. If you don't value yourself, you won't value anyone else. That's what Jesus said. You got to love yourself so you can love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. And we teach that. And it's so exciting. I've got 20,000. They're my legacy. They're the legs to my legacy. I got 20,000 legs running around. Yeah, I do. Going to 50,000. It's a movement. If you want to know, I've not done this, but if you want to know how to be a John Maxwell Team coach, just go to johnmaxwellteam.com. We'll put you on a. Now, you don't want to do this unless you want to climb. We're all climbers. We're not sliders. So if you're a slider, don't go there, please, please, please. You'll mess us up. Your name is Charlie. We'll have to drag you around all the time. Every day I do those 5 things. Value people. Think of ways to add value to people. Look for ways. Do things. And encourage others to value people. And you can do that. Every one of you can start today because today matters. Amen? Bow your heads with me, would you please? On all of the campuses, I want to thank you for allowing me to communicate to you today. And I'm going to ask the pastors on all the campuses to come forward. Because now I'm going to ask one last important question before we wrap this up. Because we're talking about making a difference. And I've shared with you my Make a Difference journey, and I know it's resonated with literally thousands of you today. But let me just talk to you for just a moment about the person that can make the biggest difference in your life. His name is Jesus. He loves you so much, he came to this earth, lived here, died on a cross, resurrected on the 3rd day to provide a relationship of forgiveness and salvation to every person that hears my voice. He can make a difference, the greatest difference in your life. With every head bowed and every eye closed, I wonder how many of you, not only in this auditorium, but the other auditoriums also, I wonder how many of you just raise your hand and say, hey, John, I know you're right, and I want to have a relationship with him. And you just raise your hand up real high all over the auditorium. And by raising up your high, you just say, John, I'm going to raise my hand because I want you to pray for me. And in a moment, I'm going to pray for you while you're in your seat that you'll begin this relationship with him. But in all the auditoriums and in this one too, would you raise your hand right now if you'd just like to know God in a personal way? Oh my goodness. Raise them up high. Raise them up high. I just like to know them. I see your hands up in the balcony being raised over on the sides. I'd just like to know. Just raise them up high for me. Real high, just for a moment. Keep them up there for me. I'm looking at them because I want to see you so that I can pray for you in a moment. Now that you that have raised your hands, right now I'm praying for you. Lord Jesus, you see the hands that have been raised, and more important than the hands that are raised visibly, you know the heart that longs to have a relationship with you. And you said, I stand at the door of your heart and I knock. And if any person hears my voice and opens the door, you said you would come in. And these that have raised their hands, they're right now saying, Jesus, come into my life as my Savior. Come into my life as my friend. I want today to begin a relationship with you. I want you to make a difference in my life so I can make a difference in the lives of others. I pray, God, right now, you'll hear that prayer and you'll answer that prayer in the name of Jesus. And everyone said, amen. Thank you for letting me pray with you. Thank you for letting me be here today. God bless you. I had a wonderful mentor, John Wooden, who would say, John, make every day your masterpiece. In fact, what he was trying to teach me was every moment matters. In fact, I can still remember sitting with him at breakfast when he was talking about making every day your masterpiece. And he was sharing with me how he would share with his team that so many times we rely on tomorrow doing well to bail us out of today when we're not doing well. He'd say, John, my players sometimes would be in practice and they weren't given 100%. Maybe their girlfriend broke up with them last night. Maybe they flunked an exam today. He said, I don't know, but they weren't giving me 100%. He said, I'd come to him, put my arm around him and say, hey, I know you're not giving me 100%, and I know what you're thinking. He says, you're thinking, well, okay, I'm giving 80% today, but tomorrow I'll give 120%. And he said, I would just want to level set him and say to my players, you can do no more than 100%. So 120% tomorrow is an impossibility. But 100% today, that's possible. If you give me 100% today, you won't have to make up something that is impossible tomorrow. But if you only give me 80%, you don't get the next 20% tomorrow. You don't get an override. You just lose the 20%. And he said, John, I try to help my players understand what they lost today, they lost. And what they did today, they accomplished. And never rely on tomorrow to bail you out because it can't and it won't. That's why you need to make every day your masterpiece. That's why every moment matters. So today, you got it in your hand. Grab it. Do it right now. If you do it now, you're preparing for tomorrow. If you don't do it now, tomorrow, you're going to try to repair yesterday. And you just can't do that well. Every moment matters.
I'm kind of excited to unpack this. No, I am excited to unpack it. At first I thought, oh gosh, I hope this isn't a lesson to me. Why did I get chosen to talk about mistakes on the 1 week? Friends, I have to fall on my sword and tell you, this week I was supposed to be on an important call with Mark. And what did I do? I made a mistake and I had it on my calendar at the wrong time. And so there I was, just not doing anything, missed the call. And so I made a big blunder this week, and Mark was gracious to forgive me. But I know that this message hit home for some of us today. I know it hit home for me, and learning that, I would say for me, one of the big pieces as a leader, just as a human being, is learning to be okay with mistakes. You know, was that something for you, Mark? I feel like for me, learning to understand that mistakes are a part of life, they're a part of leadership, and that it is a part of success. That was something that was really tough for me to learn. Was that hard for you to learn, or was that okay for you?
No, it's very hard, and what's frustrating is it's still hard.
I know.
But I have found in maturity, Tracy, specifically in leadership, that there's really, I don't know, I think there's about 4 phases of failure in a leader. First is the pretend you didn't fail. Hopefully nobody noticed. I messed up, but hopefully nobody just saw that right there. And so we have this pretend I didn't fail kind of mindset. And we're kids, we're young, we're just getting started with leadership, and we have this, I'm pretending I'm not failing. The next thing is we try to deal with failure positively. You know, we try to go, oh man, I failed, but I'm trying to get better. I'm just trying to get better. And then I think we go through this failure process that John teaches us in his book, Failing Forward. And that's where we try to create optimistic return on the failure. I think the final thing, and this is, I want to just take a couple of minutes, Tracy, and tell you about a recent conversation John and I had about failure.
Love
But this fourth area is where we anticipate failure. We kind of get excited about failure. And it was with this mindset that John and I had a recent conversation. It all started, I was incredibly honored to be a part of a PBS interview about failure. Speaking of being chosen, when somebody calls you and says, hey, we want to interview you about failure, we go, okay, the secret's out. I am a failure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, I think. And so, but it was in this interview that this thought hit me that, as oftentimes happens, you give John a simple little thought, and then he makes a simple thing so layered in its application. But here's the thought.
Yeah.
What if we started seeing failure like we see our time and like we see our money? In other words, when we put money into, we're at the beginning of the year, when we put money into an investment, you know what we're after? A return on investment. When we spend time on something, we as leaders, we're always looking, what's the return on my time? What if we looked at failure as if it needed an ROF, a return on failure? If we realized that in every failure, there was this return that we could get. Now, John's now taught publicly in public settings 3 times this idea of a return on failure. In fact, the last time he taught it was in San Francisco, and he said, I'm going to write a book on it. So I'm not going to go deep into what John did there, but I'm going to tell you something that occurred to me when this idea of a return on failure hit me. What if we all realized that failure was a part of leadership? It's just a part, it's a part of it. It's a part of life. It's a part of leadership. It's a part of getting better. Now we go into risk. We go into audacious dreams being chased with this concept. I'm going to fail. It's going to happen. What is going to be my ROF? What is going to be my return on failure? And then I came up with this idea, and John is going to take this and make it better too, I'm quite sure. But what if we looked at failure in 4 categories? What if we looked at it first as to get a return on failure, fail first? Now, I wish I could tell my 20-year-old self, hey, Mark, be the first one to fail. I wanted to be the first one to not fail. Everybody else around me failed. Let me learn from them. I don't want to fail. What if we said, hey, I want to fail first because I know that failure is the way to success. So therefore, the quicker I fail at something that's bigger than me, the quicker I can accomplish something that's bigger than me. Let's fail first. What if number 2, we tried to fail fast? Hey, I'm going to get this failure thing and I'm going to get to it. So many times we're in the middle of failing, and rather than admit we're failing, we try to cover it up and prolong the failure. What if we just went, boom, I'm failing. And we fail fast, admit it fast, and can get on with the lesson rather than prolonging the failure and living in the failure. Just fail fast. Thirdly, why don't we fail frequently? So many times I felt like, oh, I'm going to fail once in my life. It better be a doozy. Or that's the last time I'm going to fail. And we make these decisions as if a leader only fails once and then he grows up. She is now wise and she failed and it will never happen again. Well, it's not worked like that for me. If it has for you listening and watching today, kudos. So I think we need to realize along the path of leadership, failure is going to happen, but it's going to happen frequently if we're trying big enough things. And then the final thing, this comes straight from John, is fail forward. Never fall backward, never fail and retreat, but fail always with anticipation that there's something big around the corner. So yeah, to answer your question, I wish my 52-year young self, yes, I said young, could tell my 22-year-old self, because I thought I knew everything as a 22-year-old, that, hey, it's okay, you're going to fail, just get a return on it. I think life would have been a lot better.
I agree. And where do we get that from? I don't know if we just perceived it. And I don't know if there are so many of you who are driving to work or going to an appointment right now or just listening in the privacy of your home and you're listening to this. But I know when John said, he had his audience that he was speaking to at the time say it to each other. But I want you to say it to yourself in the car or wherever you're listening right now. And I want you to take a moment just right now and say it out loud. I'm going to make mistakes. Just do me a favor and say that right now.
I'm going to make mistakes.
I'm going to make mistakes.
Oh.
And I think there are so many people, I know that it's been me, and I've been a leader long enough of others, and I know you have as well, Mark, long enough to know that there are some people who are really frozen, fearful of making a mistake for some reason, either of what that meant when they were a kid in their home, either because something that happened to them in school or in a job or somewhere where where maybe even wasn't how they felt, is maybe their job or their parent or their teacher or a coach. Someone made them feel foolish or dumb or terrible or a failure even because they failed. And so because of that time, because of the mistake that they made, and it might have even been a doozy, my friend. You might be listening today and you made a doozy of a mistake. And for some reason, you can't get past that to make future mistakes. Like, oh, Mark and Tracy and John, you don't know the mistake I made. You don't know this mistake. And there is no clarifying mistake that's like, well, if you make this mistake, you can't move forward. No, the four rules Mark just kind of gave us, the four kind of failing forward steps: fail first, fail fast, fail frequently, fail forward, that Mark just gave us. That's for anyone, no matter what kind of doozies you've made in the past. We can always fail forward. But Mark, was there a time in your life, because I think all of us in our past could go back to a place in our life where we had a failure that either embarrassed us, shamed us, made us feel really bad or dumb. Was there a time in your life where it clicked for you? Where was it a mistake that you made that you realized, wow, the fear of that mistake was far worse than the actual consequence of that mistake that helped you move forward? Or was it just kind of a maturing process of several mistakes that you realized you kind of talked yourself through it?
Yeah, I love this question, Tracy, because there are several mistakes that took the sting out of failure. It really is. I think of one. I tell the story. I think I've told it on this podcast. I'm sure that I have, of before I started working with John, because of some colossal series of failures and mistakes. I found myself counting potato chips. My poverty line was a bag of potato chips. If I could afford a bag of potato chips, I could count them out and make those potato chips last an entire week if I did my math right and if I kept my appetite in check. And that was truly, I started with John Maxwell's organization, truly counting out potato chips to make bags of potato chips last a week. I had nothing, literally nothing. Bankrupt, no money. I wasn't bankrupt. I paid all my bills and all that. I didn't have to declare myself bankrupt, but I truly was bankrupt, relationally, financially, emotionally. And I've come to realize that money and having money in the account is nice, but it is not essential. In other words, I take risks now financially. Just recently, in the last couple of years, we've bet everything in a belief that we can make our future bigger, better, brighter. And I'll be honest with you, I signed these documents, I mortgaged house, I did all this stuff, and I didn't even think about it. I'm like, wow, I've lost everything before. There's a rebound in me. And so I never want to lose that and allow acquired possessions to stop me from risking those for the future and the betterment of others around me. And so that would be one example. When you go through that, and I was there because of some mistakes. I did not have to go the destitute route. I made mistakes to get there. But one of my takeaways from that is monetary possessions and financial gain is nothing but a tool to do greater impact. It is not a controlling mechanism to stop me from risking greater impact in the future.
I think it's critical to point out here, crucial to point out here to our listeners. I think they can hear you say that and think, maybe they're assuming. I'm going to make an assumption here. You might be listening and think, oh, Mark Cole can do that. He has the means to make those big steps and mortgage his house or buy all in and not think about it because there's a big safety net underneath there. But what you're saying is you have actually taken away the safety net when you do those things. You aren't leaving a little safety net. You are going all in on something. And these are big deals and big all ins. And you don't just wake up one day and you get to go big all in. It starts in the potato chip counting days when you don't have a whole lot and you go all in, when there isn't a whole lot to lose, but you're kind of saving your face, saving skin, saving your reputation and what your parents might think or your family might think or your reputation. And those little steps that you took back then when you didn't have a lot to lose, but food for the week, built your security, your confidence to where you can get to that place today. So I think there are probably listeners who might downplay those risks that you take to go all in. And I don't think we can do that fairly without understanding that it's been a whole process to get you there. So I'm thinking now, let's say we have people who, let's flip it a little bit. Maybe they're leading people who are frozen with the fear of making mistakes. And if they don't know their people well enough, which it's really important that we know the people that we lead, they might not understand what is holding them back, those fears that are maybe rooted in childhood and rooted in something in young adulthood that have them, gripped with fear from making a mistake in their professional life. So can you talk a little bit to leaders who are leading people who, or maybe a whole group of people in their organization who are gripped with fear and who aren't taking necessary steps or risks in their professional lives that are necessary in order for the team to move forward? How does a leader move the team forward if they're gripped with fear of mistakes?
I think that you really got to grasp what John's saying in point number 2. Don't make the biggest mistake of all, which is doing nothing. I love what you said. There is no safety net when you're going all in. That defies the whole concept of being all in, pot committed,
Right.
over it. There's no safety net. I'm out if this
Right.
doesn't work. Somebody else has to come and step in because I couldn't make it work. And I think that we've got to get that mindset because oftentimes we risk what we can manage rather than risk what we can't manage. And when we risk what we can't manage, that's all in, and that's making a decision. I'm not going to sit here and do nothing. And that I think that's the biggest thing, Tracy, to capture in this lesson is what is it? John, in the middle of this lesson that he's talking right now, he said he was asked the question a long time ago, what would you try if you knew failure wasn't an option? What a great question. Remember that? You've been asked that question. It's one of those questions. What's the 2 greatest days of a person's life? It's one of those rhetorical questions we've heard over and over again. What would you risk if you knew failure wasn't an option? Or what would you try? John said, I've got a better question for us. What would you risk if you knew failure was going to happen, but you would learn from it? Oh, so there's something so big that I can go in and calculate. I'm probably not going to make it, but it's going to be okay. That's the mindset that we're after because I believe back to this quote I used at the very beginning, failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of success. Ariana, that is exactly right. Ariana Huffington had it right. Success and failure are not opposite, they are codependent. For you to really be successful in your life is going to mean how big you are in your failures. John said it. What was it? Point number 7 says, remember that the size of the person, not the size of her mistakes, determines success or failure. Failure is not failure if you become better in the middle of it. Or failure is not final if you become better in the middle of the experience. That one thing, if I could release all of you from feeling like failure is final and failure is defining of who you are. I believe those are the 2 greatest sources of fear that stops people from trying something so big that failure is probable.
I agree. I agree. Well, I will let you close this out, but I just wanted to give one more encouragement to our friends, whether you're watching or listening. You might be having your mind blown a little bit, and a little bit of fear is creeping in. Like, dare I believe this? Dare I trust John enough to take me to this next place? And I just want to encourage you. You know, his last point was allow your mistakes to take you to the next level. Let your attitude about your mistakes, forgive yourself, leave it in the past. It's in the past. Leave it there. Don't carry it into your future, friends. And let this be something that really, your attitude, let it determine the altitude of where you go, friends. We're for you.
So many of you, thanks, Tracy. So many of you are listening to this and going, wow, when's John's book on return on failure coming out? I need that. And guess what? You're going to have to wait. But I know out of literally thousands of new listeners and viewers every single week, I know that there's new people out there to John's world. And there's a book that he's written on this that I believe will really help you. One is, it's right behind Tracy right there. She's got it all set up for us. But it's also this book I'm holding in my hand. Sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. And really it helps with the attitude, the perspective with which we deal with failure. I've asked our team if you would give them a discount, if the team would give you a discount as the podcast family, and they have. And so in the show notes, we're going to include a link to be able to order this book. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. We're going to give you a 15% discount when you use the keyword podcast. So make sure that you put that in there for the discount that you will receive. I will tell you, I would recommend you buy a half a dozen, and resource your team with a perspective, especially those of you that are trying audacious, BHAG things in 2022. Get your team to understand failure is not final, and that's the way to do that. There's two other episodes that I want to encourage you to listen to and point you toward that will help you with the same subject matter. One is Redefining Failure. It's a podcast we did not too long ago. And then the other is Failure is Not Final. Both of those podcast links can be found in the show note. And really, here's what we're trying to explain to you today. Our standout statement is this: fail forward. Make something happen that is so big that when it doesn't work out exactly how you want it to, you're big enough to stand that test. Hey, we have always, over the last few weeks, we've been highlighting listener comments or listener questions, and today is no exception. Your feedback, your passing the podcast along to others is the fuel that gets Tracy and I up on days like today, excited to come in here because we see and sense and smell and taste and can actually experience impact that's happening.
Leadership is developed, not discovered. The truly born leader will always emerge, but to stay on top, natural leadership characteristics must be developed. So the question is this: how do we develop our leadership qualities and characteristics and our leadership skills? About a month and a half ago, I was thinking about this because I was in a Q&A, and while I was in teaching leadership, somebody raised that question. They said, John, you talk a lot about developing leaders. Can you give me a handle? Can you just give me some things that I can really remember that will help me to do so? And off the cuff, I shared with them basically the outline that I'm going to give with you today with some content in between. So let's look at it. There are three, what I call the 3 E's of leadership development. The first is environment. I have found that leaders that are developed they're developed because they are in some kind of a leadership environment. This is incarnational. This transfers leadership is almost in an incarnational or a way that this is how leadership is fleshed out. Leaders do what leaders experience. And when I talk about environment, I'm talking about putting an environment in a person's life that they begin to experience leadership. They see it around them. They feel it. And they understand it. They understand it not because they sat down and took a lesson on leadership. They understand it because they were around leaders. They understand it because leadership principles and leadership values were talked about, lived out, fleshed out, embraced, okay? So let's talk about, let me define incarnation, since that's a phrase I use. It's a theology phrase from my background. But when incarnation is really connecting abstract ideas to human characteristics. In other words, it's taking something that is subjective or an abstract idea and fleshing it out until you can see it visualized in the life of a person or the characteristics of a person's behavior. And what I'm saying here is that leadership is more caught than taught. That's what the leadership environment is all about. Creating an environment where they catch leadership. Now, I grew up in a leadership environment. So I can talk a long time on what it means to have a leadership environment. And I can just say this. I can never think of a time when I did not realize the importance of leadership. I didn't have to have anybody sit down and say, John, it's really important for you to learn how to lead. It's very important for you to learn leadership characteristics. I saw them in my family. I watched them fleshed out around me. You need to develop a leadership environment until leadership is not something that is extraordinary and exceptional, but leadership is something that everybody does. Because really, leadership properly understood, everybody can influence and everybody can lead within an organization. The right environment allows people who are good to get better, just like a wrong environment allows people who are good to become worse. Look at environment as that which helps to create something for you that enhances already what you can do and what you already do know. Now, the second E is equipping. And that's probably the one we know the very best as far as developing leaders, because equipping is intentional, and basically leaders do what leaders learn. See, in the environment, leaders do what leaders experience. Now we're going to talk about leaders really do what leaders learn. And the function of leadership is very simple. Is to produce more leaders, not more followers. Now I'm going to read something to you. I just picked this up recently and I thought this is the approach. This is the wrong approach, wrong example of how most people get in trouble in this area of equipping. Henry Ford was a genius when it came to automobiles and the methods of mass production, but I believe his understanding of the worker was too limited when he asked. Here's what Henry Ford asked. Why is it that I always get the whole person when what I really want is a pair of hands? What was he talking about? The assembly line. He was just basically saying, I don't want anybody that can think. I just want somebody that can put the part there. Just two hands, just all I want. I don't want your mind. I don't want your spirit. I don't want your soul. I don't want your will. I don't want your commitment. I don't even want your loyalty. I want your two hands. I know most people, when they look at the people that they have in their company, their organization, this is a downfall of a lot of people. They don't understand the development of the whole person. They don't understand the big picture. They just basically see the job. And they see the job and they said, this is what's required for the job. So what do I have to do to teach you what's required of the job? And do you have the two hands? And can't you put that in the assembly line and keep it going? Equipping begins with expectations. Let's start there. To really develop a leadership equipping organization, it begins with expectations. And there are three I'm going to give you, and I'll give them to you kind of quickly. One, leadership determines growth. One of the first expectations you place upon people when you equip them to lead is the fact that the reason you're equipping them to lead is if they learn how to lead, it will bring growth to the organization. The second expectation that I gave them in equipping them is that leadership can be learned. Leadership can be learned. The third expectation is that each leader equips leaders. And I was always very careful to say this to them. Work your way out of your job. If you got a good job, that's great. Now, let me tell you what I want you to do. I want you to work your way out of your job. Go find somebody else, train somebody else, develop somebody else, equip somebody else. And, in the hospital emergency room, there's a saying, and it's just a simple saying because they got to do training and equipping quick in an emergency room, okay? I mean, it's not like you get a lifetime for this. And they what do? They say, watch one, do one, teach one. You have to be very intentional in how you're training them and equipping them. Then the third E is exposure. How do I expose them? Now this is the inspirational side of developing leaders. Leaders do
what leaders see. Okay? In fact, I love this statement. A little exposure upsets a lot of theory. I think kids should not be allowed to go to college 4 years in a row. I think they should go for 1 year to meet their friends, party. Then I think they ought to go get them a job. Because do you remember in class when teachers would ask you, profs would ask you, do you have a question on what I'm teaching? Of course we didn't have a good question. We didn't have any experience. We didn't even know what good question to ask. We were just stupid kids with a textbook, filling in blanks, making profs happy. The only way you're ever going to have real questions is to go out there and try it. Be exposed to it. Now, can I tell you something? I had no questions when I was working on my Bachelor of Theology degree. I mean, I had very little, and I went through it and got pretty decent grades and graduated, the whole deal. But can I tell you, 6 months after I had my first church, I had a boatload of questions. Now, what happened? Exposure. Now, all of a sudden, I'm into a real world, and all of a sudden, all the stuff that I need to know that will help me to be successful in life, I don't know. So when I talk about exposure, expose means to make accessible to some action or influence. Expose your leaders. I want to tell you what, expose your leaders, first of all, to great leaders. In my world, what that's meant for, oh my goodness, 20 years, is that I've intentionally every month had what I call a learning lunch, where I sit down with somebody that's smarter than I am, faster than I am, better than I am, and I buy their lunch, and what that means is they get to eat and I don't. And I ask questions, and I just learn from them, and I just glean from them. Okay, what kind of exposure am I getting to great leaders? How do you learn leadership? How do you develop leaders? By exposing them to leaders. And let me one more thing, one closing thought on exposing people. Expose your leaders to the works of great leaders. Here's what I tell people. You may never have the privilege of being around all the great leaders you want to be, but I can tell you right now, you can almost always get to the works of great leaders. The 3 E's. Environment, that's incarnational. This is what people experience. People do what people experience. Equipping, this is intentional. This is where we teach them. This is how they learn. And then exposure. This is something that they see, that they experience in their own life. The 3 E's of developing people.
Before we jump into today's content, let's talk about time and how 24 hours never seem to be enough to get anything done. As a leader of a growing business, you eventually realize that you can't do everything on your own, at least not well. Your job is to be the visionary, but instead, you spend countless hours on tasks that could be done easily and arguably better by someone else. And that's where the powerful multiplying effects of delegation prove mission critical. Our friends at Belay know the demands on leaders all too well. They are the incredible organization that is revolutionizing productivity with their virtual assistants, their bookkeepers, social media managers, and website specialists. They grow businesses just like yours and mine. So to help you start delegating, Belay is offering their latest book, Delegate to Elevate, for free. In this ebook, you'll learn how to reclaim time to focus on what only you can do by delegating to unleash the power and unleash the multiplying effect of entrusting others. To claim this offer, just text the word Maxwell to 55123 for your free copy today. That's MAXWELL to 55123. In no time, you'll be back to doing what only you can do, growing your business. Hey, welcome back, podcast listeners, podcast viewers. We're so glad to have you in the studio with us today. As I was listening to John teaching, I was reminded of a Jack Welch quote. He said, "Before you are a leader, success is about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others." And Tracy, I'm glad to be in the studio with you today. I'm glad to be learning and growing with you because Wow. Is that not one of the greatest rewarding yet challenging things, is to see others develop around us as leaders?
It absolutely is. And you know what cracks me up? When he kicked off this lesson, Mark, by saying, this is just something I came up with off the cuff. And I literally laughed out loud, because I thought to myself, if John Maxwell came up with this lesson just off the cuff, these 3 E's, maybe it's an encouragement to all of us that if we keep studying, if we keep growing, we keep tuning in and showing up for this podcast, you and I included, then maybe at one point in our life, off the cuff, we will come up with a lesson like this one at some point in our career. But Mark, I love how he kicked it off. There's so much rich content here. There's so much for us. We could chew on this for an hour, I feel like. But one of the first things he said was when he dove into environment. I feel like there is so much meat there. And one of the first things he said was that leaders do what leaders experience together. And one of the things that I remember John always saying is that you can't transfer the emotion, the lessons, everything that you have and you experience when you go somewhere and you try to bring it back to your team. And anybody who has ever gone anywhere and they've experienced something so powerful, you try to come back and you tell it to someone and it's like, you just can't transfer it. And so can you talk a little bit about the value of those experiences and that environment, and how do you bring your team with you to experience that so you don't have to come back and try to explain it to them?
I love this part of this lesson, Tracy, because, and I love what you just said. When you've been given a lot is required. Mm-hmm. John's often talked about the leadership bubble. We've seen people, I've been with John now for 22 years, and I've seen people come in, and I've seen people excel. I've seen people leave, and I've seen them almost go back to where they were before they ever joined John Maxwell's team. And that was perplexing to me. You know, how can you excel as such a great leader, then you go try something new and it's harder than you thought? And I don't take great joy or pride in that people are very successful here and then not as successful other places, because I've seen the exact opposite too. People be very successful in John's organization, leave for one reason or another, and then go be very successful. But I think what John is teaching right here on environment, that there does exist in all of us. There is a leadership bubble. There's a learning bubble. There is a relationship bubble. We can get into environments that actually make us look bigger, better, and more effective than perhaps we would be in another environment. Mm-hmm. So what is that? Why is that? And again, today, podcast listeners, viewers, we're talking about the 3 E's of developing leaders. Tracy and I could take all day on talking about this as its application to you. But we're talking about how do you create that kind of a bubble or that kind of environment for those around you? Because we're trying to develop leaders. In fact, John says this is really the standout statement. You develop yourself and you add. But when you develop others, you multiply. Mm-hmm. And how do we then create this environment to where we really exponentially raise the level of effectiveness of the people around us? And I'll tell you one big way, Tracy, that I have observed with John, I'm trying to replicate in our organization now, and that is by showing people, not telling people. You ever worked with those leaders that they do more telling than they do showing? They tell you the way you should go rather than demonstrate the way you should go. I think the biggest part of building an environment is by the leader living the example. You've got to live the example rather than talk about what you want the example to be. Mm-hmm. And the greatest environments I've been in are the environments to where the leader is going the way, showing the way, and knowing the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And so what would you say would be a good way for a leader who
wants to bring their people along? What would be something, someone's listening to this and they're like, I want to do that. I want to do that. How do I start that? Because sometimes we feel frozen in that. I want to do that, but I don't know where to start necessarily. Who do I trust to take them? I mean, obviously they're showing up for John. And so maybe let's talk a little bit about some places where a leader could take their team. We have a great idea, don't we, of where they could take their team to join John and all of us.
Yeah, so let me say this, and you and I are going to go on down to John's equipping and exposure comments too. And the idea that you and I talked about, how do we give you application on environments? I think one of the ways is you do expose them to environments that really work. So it's a little bit of exposure, it's a little bit of environment, but what are you doing to demonstrate to your team? One of the things, Tracy, in fact, you're heavily involved in this, is an event we call the International Maxwell Conference. So we call it IMC for short. Doesn't every organization have something to shorten it to? But IMC, or the International Maxwell Conference, is all about taking people that want to make a difference in themselves so that they can make a difference in others, and come into a common environment to where they learn that personal growth, that growing themselves, demonstrating growth within is important before you expect growth from those around, those outside of you. And so we start with a growth day, and then we allow people that want to go deeper to develop themselves as professional coaches, speakers, trainers, or people that want to become more effective, grow their influence in their companies.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.